Welcome, welcome all. I want to talk about the Great Depression, this huge event that reshaped both Europe and the US along with the rest of the world. In this video, I want to focus more on what's happening in Europe, and then in the next video, we'll focus on the United States. One of the important things to keep in mind is this is a very complex situation that no one really knows how to get out of. So the economists, who are supposed to be the experts, we've been talking about the social sciences since the beginning of this course with the Enlightenment. Nothing's quite going exactly to plan in terms of how to fix this. So different governments are going to be trying different things. So first of all, one of the problems that's happening is that banks are recalling lots of loans, and countries as well. The US has been loaning money to many, many different countries around the world, and now we're calling in our loans. And that means there's going to be little capital to borrow or to invest as businesses begin to shut down. Now, as industrial production shuts down, as people don't have money to buy goods, that's going to lead to lots of layoffs. And so that means that we have unemployment, which means that there's less consumer demand, which means there's more layoffs. And it's in this horrible spiral that is happening. Now, unemployment means that there are shrinking national budgets, because as people are unemployed, that means, of course, you don't have the taxes, whether that's an income tax. That means, of course, they are unemployed, so they don't have income, or if it's indirect taxes, sales taxes, because people aren't buying as much things. So just as governments need increasing money to try to help the destitute, their budgets are shrinking. And basically, this is going to produce significant poverty, as it becomes clear that this is not a recession, that this really is a Great Depression. At first, in 1929 and 1930, people assume this is just a normal kind of adjustment. Recessions happen, but this is just going to keep dragging out. So how to respond? One of the first things that happens is most countries put in protectionist measures. So this means that you try to stop trade from other countries. So if you are in England, you want to make sure that people are buying British. And so you begin to put a lot of protective tariffs, really high tariffs on French goods or German goods or American goods. But of course, as everybody's putting protectionism acts in play, as everyone's trying to protect their own domestic industries, then that means nobody can sell abroad as well. And it just contributes to the economic troubles that everyone is having. Another thing is that it was general wisdom that you wanted to try to keep your budgets balanced, that if you were beginning to get deficit spending, that would make the economic situation even worse. But it's going to be really hard to keep budgets balanced. The only real way to do that is to do layoffs and to cut social services and other kinds of plans and budgets for education and all that type of stuff, which leads to more layoffs and more poverty and less consumer demand, and on the spiral goes. Another problem for some areas in Europe was the fear of real radical ideas, especially as the Great Depression continues. Because if the moderates in the middle are not able to solve the problems, then you can begin to look for alternatives. And oftentimes the alternatives are groups that aren't in power, political parties that aren't in power because they are more fringe. But they can begin to gain more and more support. This is what happens with the Nazi Party in Germany. And so some real radical ideas on the left or the right are basically at first kind of rejected by the moderate parties that are in power. So this is going to lead to some new ideas. So first of all, by 1932-33, in both Europe and the United States, it's become very clear that the government is going to have to interfere. This is dragging on. So first of all, there's major reform of the banking system. Now this looks different in different European countries and in the US, But on the whole, there's an attempt to try to protect the banking system because there's been runs on the banks. People are trying to draw out all their money, and then banks have shut down. People have lost their life savings. So we need new regulations and protections on the banking system. There's also a tremendous focus on agriculture and trying to help family farmers to be able to survive this, because of course you need people to be producing food and to be able to stay and to keep their farms. Another thing that a number of countries are going to try are public works programs, where the government actually pays people to do things, whether that's to fight forest fires or to lay roads or to do whatever they're doing. Basically, the government needs to spend money to hire people in the hope that they'll have incomes and then be able to buy consumer goods, and then consumer demand will go up, and round and round and round it goes. So it's not just in the United States where these public works programs are kind of tried. They're also tried in the Scandinavian countries as well. Another approach in this time period that's going to be pushed a lot is autarky, which basically means to be economically self-sufficient. This is something Germany tries a lot. So the idea here is you need to produce everything you need. The problem with the system, according to these economists, is that you have this international trade system. And so when you have something like the United States have a major economic crash, it pulls everybody down. However, if your country produces pretty much everything that it needs in terms of metals and construction and food and consumer goods, then you're not reliant on these other countries. So some countries are going to try experimenting with that as well. And basically what we're going to see is managed economies. You may remember back when we started this course that I was talking a lot about the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment had said the very best economic system is laissez-faire capitalism. Yes, laissez-faire capitalism. We've been talking about that. But what we see in the 30s is really a response that that is not working. Now, some countries have already been moving away from the extremes of laissez-faire capitalism, but this is going back to having the government very involved in how your economy works. So this is really kind of a pushback and a shift, kind of saying that has not worked. And really from this point in time on in Europe, we're going to have more managed economies. Now, different countries have different layers of how much government involvement there is, but we're definitely not going to have people pushing a real extreme laissez-faire capitalism. And there'll be a few kind of interesting pushbacks on that we'll talk about in different lectures to come in different weeks, but not this one. So just know that people are really trying to figure out how to fix this. One other thing that does become kind of the norm, or the idea that has to happen in economic crisis, is that you need to have budget deficits. So pretty much everybody in Europe is going to be running budget deficits as we roll into World War II. Because the idea here is you have to spend the money to get your economy going. Now, I do just want to point out one other thing, which is that in Europe, unlike the United States, you see many countries move into dictatorship. Now, mostly these are right. Mostly they're rightist on the right side. Not right as in correct, of course, but right as in political right in terms of what is going on. Because as the moderates that were in power in the 20s, as those parties can't solve the problem, we do see people move more and more to the radical right or left. So in Germany, you get the rise of the Nazi Party. Other people are looking to the Soviet Union, which does not have or doesn't appear to be as badly hit by the Great Depression. So most of the new countries that were created by the Treaty of Versailles, their democracies fall and they go into dictatorship. Spain has dictatorship. Portugal has a dictatorship. The only new democracy, a new country created by the Treaty of Versailles that remains democratic is Czechoslovakia. And we'll talk about what happens to Czechoslovakia in the 1930s. It isn't so much the Great Depression that is going to cause its problems as German foreign policy, but that is another lecture. So the big thing to keep in mind is that everyone's struggling, all the governments are struggling to figure out what to do. Pretty much anyone who was in power in 1929, 1930 is going to fall from power, whether that's through an election when different political parties are elected, or whether it happens through government overthrow and civil war and dictatorship. But basically I can't think of anyone who's in power at the start of the Great Depression who's still in power by the middle of the Great Depression. Oh, Italy! So I just was wrong on that. But basically, you're going to shift all these governments as we go through. And we have a new policy of much more government involvement in the economy.